Thank you very much for your patience, in particular those standing in the back. There are probably chairs coming, so even more patience. I'm Bill Taylor. I am one of the vice presidents here at the Institute of Peace. And the Institute of Peace, as I've had conversations with many of you already here this afternoon, is about conflict. We're about resolving, preventing, mediating conflict. And people in this room know something about conflict. And we are looking forward to having this conversation about lessons that have been learned in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and UK, that have application for other places. And again, that's what we're interested in, what the lessons are for conflicts in other parts of the world. So this is a great opportunity to get together. We've got a great session for you. We're going to start off Senator George Mitchell, who needs no introduction to this group, and he will give us a recorded message here. Then Congressman Kennedy will take over, and we'll get started on two panels. The first from kind of the government side, and the second from the implementer side. The second panel will do the hard work of peace building, the hard work of keeping the peace, of implementing the decisions, and that get to a peace. And we're looking for, again, that's where we started. So let me ask the key folks behind this little barrier here if we're ready with Senator Mitchell. And Matt says we are, so Senator Mitchell, over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm pleased and honored to participate through this videotape. I thank the U.S. Institute of Peace, all of the other sponsors of this conference, and the very impressive list of participants. Over the past quarter century, many documentary films, books, articles, and news reports have described the events that led to the Good Friday Agreement, also known as the Belfast Agreement. They have rightly praised many people for their efforts. I believe the greatest heroes were the people of Northern Ireland and their political leaders. The people supported, worked for, and established a democratic, peaceful process as their preferred form of governance. Their political leaders, in the most difficult and dangerous of circumstances, at high risk to themselves and their families, and under tremendous political pressure, acted with courage, with vision, with strength. In the aftermath, all were at some point criticized and rebuked. Some lost their political offices. Some of their political parties suffered steep declines, but they did what was right, and history will judge them favorably. The agreement was a political compromise, the best that could be achieved at that time. It did not resolve all of the outstanding issues, but it did accomplish important objectives. It ended the political violence. It made explicit the principle of consent, that the future political status of Northern Ireland is for the people there to decide. It created a democratically elected, power-sharing government. I'm often asked what means most to me from my experience in Northern Ireland. My answer is in a few numbers. According to the Northern Ireland Police Service and the Northern Ireland Statistics Agency, prior to 1998, in the period that has come to be known as the Troubles, about 3,500 people were killed in sectarian violence, and an estimated 50,000 were injured, many of them brutally and permanently maimed. In the comparable period since the agreement, there have been about 165 security-related deaths. These are powerful numbers, but they are much more than just numbers. They are mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, whose lives were lost or brutally impaired. On the evening the agreement was reached, I praised the men and women who wrote and approved it. But I also said it would take other leaders in the future to safeguard and extend their work. And so it has. It's now up to the current leaders of Northern Ireland, of the United Kingdom, to act with the same courage and vision as did their predecessors a quarter century ago. For peace to be sustained, there must be economic growth and work opportunities for the people. That's why what you're doing in implementation of the agreement is so critical to its ultimate success. The benefits of peace must include more than the absence of violence. People everywhere want pretty much the same thing: a decent job, a decent home, and perhaps most of all, a fair chance for their children to get a good start in life. Your work is critical to their success. In their behalf, I thank you. I close with a personal comment. What started for me as a part-time 6-month assignment became nearly 6 years of chairing 3 separate but related sets of discussions. And, unexpectedly, I've spent much of the later part of my life in Ireland, the United Kingdom, and especially in Northern Ireland. In the process, I've come to know and love the people and the place. They're energetic, skilled, hardworking. It's true, they're quick to take offense, and they still have serious internal differences. But no human society is completely free of differences and disputes. The people of Northern Ireland deserve our continued friendship and strong support, as do our close friends and allies in Ireland and the United Kingdom. I believe this conference will contribute to that effort, and I thank you for letting me participate.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Peace is more than just the absence of conflict. This is exactly right. And people around the world want the same kind of things. So this is a great opportunity to have that conversation. And as promised, I'm going to turn this over to the Special Envoy for Northern Ireland, Congressman Joe Kennedy.
Thank you. I've learned a lot over the course of the past couple of years. You'd think one of the first things would be don't follow George Mitchell in the speaking program, right? To say nothing of a position of special envoy. When the first guy goes and essentially helps win a Nobel Peace Prize, it's kind of hard to people say, well, what are you going to do next? Like, well, that's a hard shoe to follow, right? But I do want to say briefly, the humility, the decency that Senator Mitchell expressed, and that just comes from him in that video. He's got a lot of friends in this room. What an example it is for the rest of us to seek to emulate. Many of you were over with our former Consul General in Belfast, Paul Narain, who's here with his wife. Paul, thank you for everything you do for our State Department, our country. And there was a profile of Senator Mitchell in Northern Ireland at the time. And it said that he listened them to agreement. And what an extraordinary statement that is. And so to the senator, to his family, the legacy that he has left and what he has helped build in Northern Ireland is palpable today. And for those of us that are wrestling with the uncertainty that we see around the world, gosh, that humility and that example he sets is one for all of us to take some comfort in and seek to emulate. So, Senator, thank you, sir, and to your family as well. To everybody here at the U.S. Institute of Peace, thank you so much for opening your doors once again, Ambassador, to distinguished guests, for also once again giving us a chance to highlight the extraordinary work that has been done, as Senator Mitchell has said over and over and over again, by the people of Northern Ireland. And yes, with the help of an awful lot of friends, but ultimately it is their work that we come to celebrate today. I would also be remiss, some of you know my time in this position is winding down, probably not a surprise, but there's a lot of folks in the State Department that has helped make this work possible. If I tried to go through and name everybody here that has done that, I am going to miss somebody. So I love you all and thank you. But thank you for your extraordinary work that you have all done. I got back from Belfast on Friday. During the past 2 years, the people of Northern Ireland have taught me a lot. But by far the biggest lesson is how far they've come. And it's fitting, of course, that we just heard from Senator Mitchell, who said towards the end of his 3.5 years in Northern Ireland, that he dreamt someday of returning with his then young son, Andrew. He predicted that they would roam the countryside and taking in the sights and sounds of the region. He also pledged that on a rainy afternoon, they would drive into the parliamentary building, Stormont, sit quietly in the visitors' gallery of the Assembly chamber. That they would watch and they would listen to the members of the Assembly as they debated ordinary issues in a peaceful, democratic society. He predicted there would be no talk of war, for the war would have long been over. There'd be no talk of peace either, he thought, for peace by then would be taken for granted. And as some of you know, the senator and his teenage son did in fact go back. And rumor has it that it was health and education that were at the top of the legislative agenda that day. That, folks, today is the Northern Ireland that they have built. That despite the real complexity and challenges of, I've learned this term, that we place, right? The people of Northern Ireland have done what they do best. They've gotten on with it. It's the strength of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and its Strand 2 institutions. That the work that these institutions have been doing day in and day out for the past 25 years. A North-South Ministerial Council that provides a forum for ministers to make decisions jointly, to discuss issues of shared interest, and foster genuine collaboration around the border. The 6 cross-border implementation bodies that have fostered without fail cooperation on everything from trade to food safety to language. This is the hard, daily grind of governance. And it doesn't always make headlines. But the facts that these institutions have continued their work, despite great political uncertainties, is a testament to the strength and resilience of Northern Ireland. That despite the pain and hurt and loss that, as the senator said, were very, very real, we can never ignore that. And that it is still recent for so many memories. People still need clean water. They need safe food. They need businesses to go on and thrive, and they need their kids in school. And so one of the greatest takeaways for me is not even so the lessons that we need to help build it in Northern Ireland. It's what we can take from them. And folks, from somebody that has had the honor and privilege of serving in Congress and traveling to many places around the world, I challenge you to find another place the world over that has done a better job today of wrestling with issues of identity and past, and not ignoring them, finding the space to protect them and recognize them, while also doing the hard work of creating community and ensuring that we don't try to change the way people define themselves, but create the space to make sure that that is protected, even celebrated for your neighbor so that you yourself can enjoy that same privilege. And by doing so, you build community. That's what Northern Ireland has done. Look around the world. Tell me if you can find a place that has done it better. So let me close with this. My very last stop on my last trip was Friday afternoon, and I was at the Newbridge Integrated School. Taking questions from these kids who were extremely excited to keep the questions going because it meant that they were skipping the rest of class. But there was one young man, Charlie Webb. He was from Fermanagh, which, as some of you will know, was or is one of the most marginal Westminster seats in the entire UK. It was an area that had seen some of the worst of the violence. None of the questions that he asked were about that. Zero. He asked about American politics. He asked about leadership. He asked about current events and public service. He had the curiosity and open-mindedness that we all would wish in our own kids. And he embodied how far Northern Ireland has come. It's a community that is not defined by its past, but informed by it. A spirit of resilience that is not actually a new one in Northern Ireland, but reflective of the real hard work of governance, day in and day out. What has gotten them and will get all of us through darkest days, and how much we can learn from that. So thank you again for being here today. Ambassador, thank you for hosting us. It is now my distinct honor and pleasure to turn it over to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the United States and Deputy Secretary Hudson-Dean. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you to USIP for having this event, and it's wonderful to see such a fantastic audience here. It is a very special day, and we are thrilled to be a part of this as both the State Department and the United States in general, and the American people. We're very privileged today to have representatives here in the audience from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Ireland for this important discussion about Northern Ireland's success and opportunities stemming from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. 20 years ago, Strand 2 of the agreement established the all-island structures to collaborate over areas of common interest in Ireland and Northern Ireland. The North-South institutions, the North-South Ministerial Council, and the North-South implementation bodies encourage cooperation that benefits both Northern Ireland and Ireland. And so now we are going to have a panel, which I'm very happy to moderate, to both look back into these institutions and some of their successes and what they've done, and to try and dig a little into Northern Ireland's future opportunities as well, which the United States is very invested in. And so I've asked our panelists to think a bit about the significance of government support coming from the US, the UK, and Ireland in Northern Ireland's success for the future. Special Envoy Kennedy, thank you for your very thoughtful remarks. And now I would like to introduce our other panelists, and perhaps if you'd like to come and sit up here, please. So apart from our special envoy, we have Fionnuala Quinlan, who is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Ireland, having just taken up the position this summer. She has previously served as Consular Director at the Department of Foreign Affairs in Dublin, also as Ireland's ambassador to Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, and Eritrea. That's a big task there. And as Consul General of Ireland in New England. Until 2009, Fionnuala worked as a journalist and an editor in Ireland and abroad for almost 15 years. Nick Alton is the Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the British Embassy here in Washington and has been in that position for 2 years. Before Washington, he was Deputy Director and Head of the US and Canada Department in the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. He has a wide range of diplomatic experience with a lot of expertise in the Middle East. And finally, Richard Cushney is the Director of the Northern Ireland Bureau, also fairly recently arrived in Washington. He started in August. Richard is a career Northern Ireland civil servant and previously served as Deputy Director of the Bureau from 2017 to 2020. And so welcome, and let me come and join you over there. All right. So here, this has been a good year for Northern Ireland, and I'm really happy myself to have taken this on as part of my portfolio. I'm also fairly new in the department in this position, having started in August, coming out of working in Northern Europe. With the Stormont restored and the economy growing, there's so much that we have to build on now, and we're very excited about that. That could not be possible without Northern Ireland's executive and all of its hard work and all of the parties that have been collaborating for the common good. Power sharing is very hard, but Northern Ireland is at its best when the people there are at the center of the decision making. And so, in the spirit of that, my first question is for Richard. I'd like to ask you that while we're going to talk a lot about Strand 2, let's talk first a little bit about Strand 1, the power sharing government. And could you give us a quick update on the Strand 1 initiatives going on right now and what you think of that?
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you again to the Institute of Peace for hosting us today, and for Joe, for all you've done, Joe, in particular. I think, as well as all the many achievements and the things you've been saying today, I think you've brought real light into the relationship and the energy to it as well. Sometimes literally, actually. I think the weather often seemed to improve when you were there. And I think as well, when I look across the audience, I see so many friends of Northern Ireland, so many supporters. It's great to see you all today. And I think it's quite humbling given the amount of expertise we've got in the room. And I think this goes back to, I think, Gina, who you'll be hearing from later, and James Applegate, the US Consul General in Belfast, who played a leading role in identifying that there's this opportunity to say more about not just the peace process in its generality, but how the specific elements work together. Strand 2 is the one we're going to be focusing on today. But as you say, Strand 1 is a key element of that alongside Strand 3. And I think the exciting thing about Strand 1 is that, as Joe's maybe mentioned, it's not actually that exciting anymore. The really exciting thing is the bread and butter issues that the executive has dealt with. And I think some of you will have seen some of the other side of that in terms of the excitement. The First and Deputy First Minister were here in March with many others. And I think a lot of people felt the energy and the dynamism that came from them. And that relationship continues into Northern Ireland. And we've got a 4-party executive that has agreed a really dynamic programme for government that has all the real issues that people are dealing with. And I was listening to obviously the US election here, and many of those issues are the same ones: affordable housing, better healthcare, issues around a stronger economy, educational needs, getting, as George Mitchell referred to, that early start for people as well, making that the best possible thing. So those are the priorities. That's a programme for government which has been out for consultation. I think we're one of the few places that actually puts our programme for government out for full consultation, and we've had a huge reception and interest from members of the public who are engaging with that. And against the backdrop of that programme for government, which is dealing with all those really important bread and butter day-to-day issues, there are lots of other exciting things going on as well. Where Northern Ireland's due to host the Golf Open next year, 2026. We're launching a new studio space called Studio Ulster next year as well, which builds on the exciting stuff we've done on Game of Thrones. I always like to mention Game of Thrones first, and then I'll mention Derry Girls as well, just to get that in before anybody else does. In terms of that kind of creative industry, which I know Joe's been very involved in as well. So we've got those really exciting things coming on against that background of stability. So I think, I'm back to this, but across all the 3 strands is this sense of dialogue and participation. Once you bring people together to talk about things, exciting opportunities develop and challenges can be tackled.
Thank you very much. Then to build on it, another extremely important part of this is the elements brokered by our other colleagues here, UK and Ireland. And so I'm thinking here of the North-South Ministerial Council and the North-South implementation bodies and how they have functioned. And so would like to turn to our other 2 panelists here to talk a bit about that. What do you see as having been the greatest accomplishments of late, and where might that be headed in the future, those organizations?
All right, I'll start. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to Ambassador Taylor for hosting us here at the USIP. It's a fantastic facility to be here, and it's a great panel to be on. And I want to add my thanks to others. You couldn't get a lot of this, I'm afraid, Joe, but thanks so much to Special Envoy Joe Kennedy for everything you've done over the last couple of years. It's been such a privilege to have you help support the economic development of Northern Ireland and to be part of the prosperity journey that they've gone on through the 25th anniversary, through President Biden's visit, through the Northern Ireland Investment Summit. It's been fantastic having you with us on that journey. So thank you so much for that. As Rich was saying, I mean, I think from our point of view and the UK government, the underpinnings of the agreement are the three strands when they work together. So that is the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive, which is functioning and up and running, which is a fantastic achievement of the parties in Northern Ireland to get to that point. It is the North-South bodies in Strand 2. The UK government is not formally part of that Strand 2. That's between the Government of Ireland and the Northern Ireland Executive. But obviously there's a great interest from the UK in making sure that those North-South bodies are kind of delivering on issues like language rights and cultural events and tourism and infrastructure and all the things that those North-South bodies oversee. And then the third element is the UK-Ireland institutions and cooperation, which, to my mind, has been the important bit through times of difficulty in Northern Ireland, when it's been difficult to get the functioning of the executive running or the assembly, to have institutions like the British-Irish Cooperation Council, to have what we're planning next year is the UK-Irish Summit, to have those institutions showing that there's a place where shared matters of concern between the two governments can be had frankly and honestly, and to show to the people of Northern Ireland that whatever else is happening in the politics, those issues of security, of citizenship, and legacy can be kind of discussed openly and frankly. And I think that's when one of the most important elements of the Good Friday Agreement in terms of its longevity and its ability to have mechanisms for those discussions to happen frankly and honestly.
Very good. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just pick up the thread there, but first let me say again thank you to Congressman Kennedy, thank you Ambassador Taylor, thank you so much Sharon, and indeed to the US Institute of Peace for having us here today. I mean, I think it's just really great that we have this opportunity to think through how the Good Friday has led to the incredible improvement of lives of people across the island of Ireland. I was struck also by what Senator Kennedy said about, of course, the benefits of peace have to include more than the absence of violence. And I think that is what the North-South bodies, the North-South Ministerial Council have contributed to. I mean, when the Good Friday Agreement dates to 98, of course, and there was a referendum carried on both sides of the border overwhelmingly. And what that referendum said is, we choose peace. We choose to do things differently. We choose to work together. We choose to make difficult decisions together. And we choose to walk this road together in a different way towards a more hopeful future. And I think it's always worth just remembering that was what we all set out to achieve together. And it was the North-South Ministerial Council as one of the key institutions under Strand 2, of course, that allowed that to be possible, that gave that shared space, that gave that place whereby that work of progressing areas, of progressing important areas could take place. Those who drafted and agreed the Good Friday Agreement, of course, were very aware that links between North and South, and as Nick said, of course, East and West under the other strand were so important. There's 6 areas of collaboration under the North-South Ministerial Council. Those are led by the lead departments on either side, and those are things that you might expect: agriculture, education, environment, health, transport and tourism. And there's enormous good work has been carried out there. And then, of course, the North-South implementation bodies, many of whom are represented here today, also take forward incredibly important areas of work. And I know you'll speak to that a bit later, but it covers everything from cancer care to transport links and many other areas. So I think really today, what the message I think we can take from it is that through the work of the North-South Ministerial Council and the North-South implementation bodies, really the lives of people across the island of Ireland have been transformed. And it is through very practical collaboration in most parts. And as my British colleague said, having those places where conversations can take place. So I just want to welcome the representatives of the North-South bodies and really looking forward to hearing from you today on the concrete examples. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Finola. Joe, now turning to you, following up on this theme a little bit, you've had your nearly 2 years working with these organizations and so many representatives, private sector, public sector. As you are on your way out, what's your assessment? How would you look back on what's been achieved and how the groups are working together and your view?
Madam Secretary, so I think, as you could probably tell from my opening comments, I'm very optimistic about the future of Northern Ireland. That's not to say blind to the challenges that Northern Ireland has. They've got plenty of them. We got plenty of them too. Some of them in Northern Ireland are unique to Northern Ireland. A lot of them aren't. They're like, we got a number of the challenges that they're wrestling with as well. And so trying to impart on the people of Northern Ireland that, like, yeah, there's challenges there. There's challenges here. Yeah, you've got your own. You've got some that aren't your own. You shouldn't be overwhelmed by them because you went through not just 30 years of division in the Troubles, but a couple hundred years of division before that. And you found a way to build peace and maintain it. And like, that's the hard part. And what you've also built is a community that when people are asked to find ways to contribute, not one person I called here in the United States in this position, asking for assistance, connections, whatever else, not one person ever said no. It might not have been the right fit. It might not have been the right ask. It might not have been the right, but everybody tried. And that wasn't because I was asking. That was because people were willing to help. Rich, I was struck by when you were saying the kind of the bread and butter of this, and butter's a great example, right? Of a way in which I got, my wife is down here at the moment. I had to make breakfast for my kids, and it was Kerrygold butter that was on the griddle this morning, right? As a great example of the ways in which these economies can, where there is collaboration and on the unique attributes of the, on an island, all island basis, on ways in which you can build world-leading industry. And Madam Secretary, I'll wrap on this on one example, and forgive me for those of you that have heard it. Peace is necessary for prosperity, but prosperity is in the long run necessary for peace, right? You can't create economic opportunity for one segment of society and deny it to somebody else and think that that's going to be one that prospers in the long run, right? Like that just doesn't work. And so there's a necessary role for economic development and for government to try to create incentives to spread that peace dividend across more segments of society. A couple of you, I think, were with me on this trip when I was back in Belfast in May, I think. And we were at the Crumlin Road jail, which some of you will know, but was a site of significant public-private partnership and investment from some U.S. investors from New Jersey and some money from the British government that came in to help rehabilitate, renovate some of those old structures from a very famous jail in Belfast. And they purchased the McConnell's brand of whiskey that was, I think if I remember correctly, first hit the market in 1776. So a good year for United States investors, right? Went out of business in Prohibition. We'll blow right by that one, right? And then they're bringing it back, and they're putting the still and the distilleries inside the jail. And so it's a ribbon cutting, and they did a beautiful job. And we're waiting for the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. There's a bunch of ministers that are there, and I'm next to Conor Murphy, and I said, "Gosh, this place is beautiful. Have you been here before?" And like, the moment I said it, I was like, "Oh no, I want that back," right? So my diplomatic career ended far more quick than I was hoping, right? And he kind of shrugged and said, "Yeah, I have." And the outline of the cells is still drawn on the floor. And he pointed and said, "That one was mine." And then he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Times change." And about a half an hour later, it's about 10 in the morning, 10:30, and I'm not a drinker, but I'm sitting around a table with a Sinn Féin First Minister, a DUP Deputy First Minister, both women in their 40s, Conor Murphy, who had stayed there, and we're sipping Irish whiskey at 10 a.m. invested in by folks from the United States. And I'm looking around the table going, wow, times change. But they change because people are willing to change them. And what you have in Northern Ireland are folks that are willing at this point to go through an awful lot of pain and hurt to make sure that that future is better for their kids. I heard it on Friday at the Black Mountain Shared Space with somebody that was active in the Loyalist paramilitaries who said, I will never define myself as anything other than a loyalist. But a brighter future for my son requires a different path forward. Amen to that.
Absolutely.
Can I just add one thought connected to that? Whenever I was looking at the north-south bodies and looking at how the connection and the dialogue is what makes them work, and that special relationship that's developed through those bodies, I was thinking again about our relationship with the United States and how important it is. It's really refreshing to hear from George Mitchell and from yourself about how much Northern Irish people have contributed to this, because sometimes that can get a little bit lost in this, but I wanted also to pay attention just to how much we still get from the United States. You mentioned the investment matters, both in terms of economic opportunity, but also that cultural engagement, those connections, that bringing a different dynamic or energy into the conversation really, really matters. And I think that's what makes it so special. All those things put together is what makes it such an achievement. And I think as you mentioned 1776, as we come forward to the 250th anniversary, that Declaration of Independence, which has an Ulsterman's name down at the bottom, John Dunlap, having printed it, those stories, those individual stories, are something that can come more to the fore as well, I think.
Thank you, and that helps me. Once we wrap up, I'll make a few closing points, but that's to one of my points, is that the United States is very, very firmly committed to peace in Northern Ireland in the future, and to our great partners, UK and Ireland. And this has long been a bipartisan, strongly supported issue, which we anticipate to continue, of course. As we are going to wrap up our panel soon, I'll ask one question and have all of you just jump in there as you like. As the Senator Mitchell noted, and you, Joe, noted, Joe, legacy is an important part of this. As we look back, what have we learned? What are we taking forward? What can we be proud of? Should we double down on to ensure success and active peace? So I would like to ask each of you, what do you think is a legacy item going forward? What would you take from the history, which is so important and in many ways very recent, for the young people that Joe was mentioning that he's talked to?
Shall I start? Okay. I think, Joe, you kind of covered a lot of the points there. I thought Senator Mitchell put it the best. He said, the people of Northern Ireland were the real heroes in that agreement process. And the bravery, the innovation, the willingness to take risks that the people and the party leaders took in 1998 and the process that led up to it was extraordinary. And I think that's one of the lessons from that. As was mentioned in the introduction, I spent most of my career in the Middle East, and where peace processes succeed, it does require that kind of leap of faith that the people who were your opponents can now be your partners in an agreement. And that kind of barrier to overcome is an extraordinary one, but when it can be done properly, can lead to a lasting settlement. And I feel that's one of the big lessons from my point of view, from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in terms of success. And I think that's seen then in some of the implementation bodies that have been taken forward. This is an agreement that had many midwives. There was the UK government played a role, the Irish government played a role, the US government, and we haven't mentioned, but President and Secretary Clinton played personal roles in that process as well, and they take great credit in seeing that through. But so did the civil society and faith groups and NGO groups and individuals coming together as citizens and as people in both seeing that agreement through and then creating the architecture that allowed it to be a sustainable agreement that we see today, 26 years on. And so I think one of the lessons I would take away from the agreement is just how individuals can be empowered and enabled to show that bravery and that leap of faith that your opponent is not actually necessarily your opponent, but can be a partner in peace, and then to enact the kind of institutions that allow you to take that forward. And that's one of the lasting successes, I think, of the Good Friday Agreement. And to be honest, it's seen around the world by other peace processes as an example of how success can be not just achieved, but sustained over a quarter of a century later.
Might come in there as well. Thank you. I think those are points I would agree with. I suppose one thing I think that really Northern Ireland taught us as well is that, people can hold on to their own identity. Yeah. And I think that is really important. Like now in Northern Ireland, people can be British or Irish or both. So I think that's really, and both, they might disagree about the direction of the future. They might have many other disagreements, and those positions are all legitimate. reconciliation, of course, is the journey that continues. You know, we do have peace, but reconciliation is work that has to keep going. And I think that's the work that keeps going in Northern Ireland every day, and it's enormously aided by our partners around the world. But, you know, I mean, there's still separate schooling, there are still separation walls, there are still a lot of issues, but people continue to come together and work every day. And I guess that's a really important lesson. International support, I mean, we talked here, of course, we heard from Senator Mitchell, obviously Congressman Kennedy, and so many Americans on both sides of the aisle have really shepherded Northern Ireland through some very difficult moments. But also we had a lot of support from Europe, from the European Union, from Canadian judges and from Finnish politicians. And of course, as Nick said, the role of civil society cannot be underestimated for a moment. When roadblocks were hit, it was sometimes to churches or other figures that you know, we needed to turn in order to move things along. And then I think the final point that I would make on in terms of lessons is women. Somebody mentioned today we have the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister are women, the most senior civil servants in dealing with Northern Ireland issue in the British government, and of course in Northern Ireland itself are women. Not too long ago, there were not too long ago. I mean, I think we go back to the 90s. Women had to form their own coalition to make their voices heard, and they were incredible advocates for it. And of course, that's a lesson of peace building everywhere. Women need to be at the table, and they really need to be putting their perspectives forward and to be engaged in the processes and the solutions. And I think we saw the success of that in Northern Ireland. Thanks.
I would just pick up on very similar points, really. I think dialogue. People from where we're from like to talk a lot. And as George Mitchell pointed out, we sometimes can do some listening as well. But you bring people together and you look at we'll hear more today about some of the things which the North-South bodies have solved, the issues and challenges they've faced, and the great solutions that they've put in place as a result of that. So I think that dialogue, keeping in touch, communicating, once you put the institutional framework there, you provide a vehicle for people to do that. And then the other thing, picking up on what Nick said, I think celebrating success is maybe something that we maybe, again, culturally don't do so much at home. It's great to be here again today to shine a spotlight on that. There are difficult problems out there. There are solutions. We've come up with some. There are more still to be developed. But shining a spotlight on those and celebrating them more so they can be that kind of message globally for what can be achieved. So I think dialogue and celebrating success would be the two for me.
Very briefly, agree with what the comments by all the other panelists. Two final things. The opportunity around childcare. Many places around the world, including the United States, are wrestling with how to provide families with the ability to raise a child. For a region that had a lot of its young people leave, it can be a tool to bring them back. But the larger observation there, kids are kids, and perhaps uniquely with this audience, I'm sure you've had that shared experience that I have, which regardless of where you are in the world, I've never thrown a ball at a kid that didn't pick it up and throw it back, right? Anywhere. No 3-year-old asks where you go to church or if you go to church, right? They throw a ball back at you and they kick one and they play tag, right? And tackle and all the other things that kids do. You create a chance for those kids to mix, it forces the parents to mix. And I can tell you, still this morning, there's no more humbling experience than trying to raise young kids, right? But that is an experience that every parent has. And so that opportunity around addressing a massive economic need, providing an opportunity for more women to fully participate in the economy, the best education dollars we can spend, creating the opportunity to have that mix, it's a unique economic opportunity for Northern Ireland going forward. And that is a larger observation of, I have heard nationalists and loyalists say that same thing that man did to me on Friday, which is, I have defined myself and I was defined by this conflict and defined by this legacy until I had a child. And the future I want a different future for my kids. That entire generation of peace babies is now 25, 26, 27 years old. The impact of that for Northern Ireland, again, not to push aside the past, but to create a new reality for that next generation, is a palpable one and a very powerful one. And we can help them take it.
right, thank you all very much. I think we're actually right on time to end our panel. So I would like to end with a quote from President Biden, who said, "To the young people of Northern Ireland, your history is our history. Your future is our future. It's hard to communicate just how deeply invested in your success people across the United States are." And I will say for my own part, I pledge to continue that in this very exciting role and with all of the colleagues here on stage. And so thank you very much for joining us. I would like to now... We pass over to our second panel, which will be moderated by Anthony Suarez.
Thank you so much. My name is Anthony Suarez. I am the director of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, actually now the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation since September, when we celebrated our 25th anniversary. I'm here to moderate this panel here today, but first of all, I'd like to really begin by thanking Ambassador Taylor and USIP and the State Department for helping for organising this event and making this event possible, and for inviting us to be here today with you. I'm just going to introduce who's alongside me here on the panel. So beginning nearest to me, we have Sharon McMahon, Chief Executive of the Locks Agency, and then followed by John McDonough, Chief Executive of Waterways Ireland, and Gina McIntyre, Chief Executive of the Special EU Programmes Body, CUPB. And at the end, we have Duncan Morrow, who is Director of Community Engagement at Ulster University, but also he had previous roles before his academic life that are very pertinent to what we're discussing here today, and hopefully you might mention those roles during the discussion. My job has been made a lot easier, I must say, by Special Envoy Joe Kennedy and by the first panel, who basically explained to you strands 1, 2, and 3 of the Good Friday Agreement. So they're absolutely fantastic. But I'd really like to start off by just saying that alongside the UK and Irish governments and political parties in Northern Ireland, the United States, through the support of successive administrations, must take enormous pride in what the Good Friday Agreement has achieved in the last 26 years. As has already been explained, the 98 Agreement not only offered us a new beginning for politics and governance in Northern Ireland through the institutions established under Strand 1, as well as for new relations between the island of Ireland and Great Britain under Strand 3. It also brought in a new framework, a new era for cooperation between the two administrations on the island of Ireland under Strand 2. And has already been expertly explained to you by others, Strand 2 established the North-South Ministerial Council, bringing together two administrations on the island of Ireland, but it also led to the establishment of 6 implementation bodies that would operate across the island of Ireland under the overall policy direction of the North-South Ministerial Council. As well as the chief executives that we have here with us today on this panel of some of the implementation bodies, we have others, and it would be remiss of me not to mention them: Safe Food, Intertrade Ireland, and the language body, made up of 2 agencies, but one of them is actually represented here, Forrest na Gaeilge, here in the audience with us today, and also the Ulster Scots Agency. And we mustn't forget also the establishment in 2000 of Tourism Ireland under the tourism sector under the North-South Ministerial Council. Established through legislation, the bodies under Strand 2, the Good Friday Agreement, came into operation in December 1999. So this is their 25th anniversary year. It's therefore a really opportune moment to really reflect on the collective impact of those implementation bodies over the last quarter of a century. And we've just been leading on a piece of research looking into the collective impacts of all of the implementation bodies, and what we can see is a golden thread of peace that runs through and connects the work they have done continuously over the 25 years, helping to create a shared space where the economic, environmental and health benefits of peace can be achieved and can be realised. Much has been achieved and there's a lot more to be achieved, and we'll be discussing that in a moment. But the successes of the implementation bodies are also those of the Northern Ireland Executive and the Irish Government, as well as of the US Government, and of course of the UK Government as a co-guarantor of the 1998 agreement. A lot has been done, a lot more is to be achieved. So I'm just going to very quickly begin by asking each of the chief executives here of the three implementation bodies just to give us a quick understanding, very briefly, of the remit that's been given to their specific implementation body. So Sharon, would you just in a sentence or two, just explain what the LOCKSS agency remit is?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'll do my best. Anthony, as somebody said, we like to talk. So the remit of the LOCKSS agency is a very broad remit, and we are there to sustainably manage, promote and develop the fisheries of the Foyle and Carlingford areas. Now, people think that it's just about Lough Foyle and Carlingford Lough. It is actually about the catchment areas. So we work with 4,500 square kilometres of rivers, the two sea lochs, Lough Foyle and Carlingford Lough, and an area that extends 12 miles out to sea from, if any of you know Ireland, from Malin in Donegal right round to downhill in Northern Ireland. So it's quite an extensive area we manage. It equates to about 32% of the land mass of Northern Ireland in total. So we do this through scientific research and development, which underpins and informs all of our management decisions. And we do that through collaboration. And our work is, as I said, quite a broad remit. Our organisational responsibility spans several areas. It's about fisheries management through conservation and protection. We are an enforcement agency. We administer environmental regulations. We regulate and develop recreational angling, development of marine tourism, development of agriculture, and we run an extensive environmental education and outreach programme. So that's as quick as I can do it, Anthony.
Yeah, fantastic, Joe, Sharon. And John, what about Waterways Ireland? Just briefly, the kind of remit that you've been given.
Thank you, everybody. We're the Navigation Authority. So we're responsible for natural rivers and canals that were constructed back in the 1800s. If you start off in Mizen Head at the bottom of Ireland and you walk to Malin Head at the top and then you turn around and walk back down again, that's kind of the length of the navigations that sit within the portfolio. It's about 1,100 kilometres. We're also the leading provider of what are called greenways or trails across Ireland and Northern Ireland. We have about 700 kilometres. Our remit is to manage, maintain, develop and promote the waterways. It's pretty straightforward. We have assets that are valued at about €1 billion. We're headquartered in Fermanagh, which was mentioned earlier on, so on the western side of Northern Ireland. We have about 400 people, so from a staffing perspective, we're the biggest of the North-South implementation bodies. They're dispersed across Ireland and Northern Ireland. Our tangible assets, you can imagine, are things like lock gates, bridges, infrastructure projects as such. And our intangible assets are things like our brand, and most importantly, the inherent capability that we have to be able to work in water, which is a very special capability. So that's who we are.
Thank you so much, John. And Gina, what about SEPB?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everybody who has come along today, and particularly USIP who've organised this. As Richard mentioned, it was my initial idea, and everybody else has done all the hard work since, so thank you. The Special EU Programmes body is quite what it says on the tin. We run we're responsible for managing EU programmes that have partnerships with the Government of Ireland, the Northern Ireland Executive, and the UK Government as well contribute now to these programmes. We have several programmes. One is an Interreg programme, which is quite common across Europe, addresses challenges of a border, you know, the periphery, the geography, and access to services for citizens. And the other programme is unique, and it's called the Peace Programme. And we've had that programme now for 25 years. Indeed, it was there already before, by about 4 years, because the EU, along with all of those partners, decided that they wanted to make a practical contribution to the ceasefires. And so for us, it's really important to reflect the fact that before the peace agreement, there was actually 14,000 projects funded, small projects, just as the previous panel has alluded to, building those contacts, making those formations of relationships, and they were doing that work already before the peace agreement. And I think that's a really important point, because it means that the atmosphere was right at the time for the peace, the political peace agreement. We deal with the practical, on-the-ground peace building. And so we're very, very fortunate. We've had 25 years of iterations of the peace programme, and we now have a significant programme called Peace Plus, which incorporates everything from as relationship building, capital infrastructure, transport, healthcare, economy, prosperity. Those are the fundamental parts of our programme, peace and prosperity, exactly what Joe talked about. And so we're honoured to have that programme thanks to all the partners involved. And we've been able to deliver that programme thanks to all the visionaries who, in particular the US, who helped establish the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, and we were enshrined in legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Now, Duncan, from your perspective, even maybe going back to your kind of academic career, how have you seen the work? I mean, these implementation bodies are all very different. They're on the ground. They're implementing. The kind of policy that's set. But how have you seen what they do, engaging with the wider public, with people on the ground, with communities, north and south in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, where they operate?
So just to remove the veil of secrecy, I was chief executive of an organisation called the Northern Ireland Community Relations Council, which was an implementing body on behalf of implementing bodies. The design of these programmes was incredibly intensive. We worked directly to the International Fund for Ireland, which is another one who's not represented here, and the SCUPB, the EU programmes body. My job particularly was to focus on the one bit that is extremely difficult to achieve, which is called reconciliation, and to invest in projects which could turn that in some sense or other from aspiration to something which people could feel and touch. And I have to say that the reality of that is that implementation bodies were not simply implementing pre-planned programmes, they are development agencies. Our task on behalf of the peace process was to put in place some planks and some stepping stones towards the possibility that was it's still the holy grail of the whole thing, which is that people can live in what it says in the Good Friday Agreement: reconciliation, tolerance and mutual respect. And the history of Northern Ireland tells you that those are impossible, that we cannot live with each other with reconciliation because what has been done is too difficult, that mutual respect is something you can talk about but you never really feel. And actually the only way to bridge that is show not tell, demonstrate, make that possible to be seen in practice. But also the implementation body's role within that therefore was at various times to keep the show on the road when politics was falling away from reconciliation, tolerance and mutual respect. And the good news today is that we're back on track, that the longer term process at some level or other has, if you like, managed to keep on track, and the implementation bodies and their work. But when I say implementation bodies, you don't even get a tangible sense of just how complex and how important that work was. That's building visible signs of people working together or creating assets which people can operate together where it previously was not true. That is we work to encourage the Black Mountain Shared Space Project, for example. That was one of our early projects, where youth people, young people, and people can think about their futures in a different way. But it's about education, it's about prisoners, it's about dealing with intergenerational trauma, it's about victims, it's about churches who previously don't talk to each other, it's about creating community projects in different villages where historically they've seen each other as enemies. I just simply want to put down on paper, for me, various times, the combination of the international support and the implementation bodies made it possible to keep going while politics had to work through some of the really difficult issues that were there and still had to do so. And without them, I'm not 100% sure we would have got as far as we got. So I do think this is more than simply a token concentration. It's actually something which has tangible results in which we should be incredibly grateful for them.
Yeah, and I think you're quite right. When we talk about implementation bodies, it sounds really clinical, really, but it's the practical stuff. It's the stuff that's been done on the ground across a whole range of areas and across a huge geographical space that I think has contributed to that hard work of kind of peace and reconciliation. Turning to the others, I mean, Gina, in terms of that contribution that's been made to peace and reconciliation over the last 25 years, in terms of work that you have done in terms of the SUPB, what do you think would be the major contribution? If you had to pick up one area, what would it be?
I think that for a long time, as Duncan said at the start of the programmes and post the agreement, everybody was just so pleased and delighted that we had peace, and it was the absence of violence. And so there was a time where we were building on quite basic sort of, it sounds really basic, but it was really difficult for a lot of people. As Senator Mitchell has outlined, the people had to start getting to know one another. And this was that sounds crazy, I know, but in Northern Ireland and the border counties, these people stayed segregated, and they still are schooled segregatedly different now, and they live differently in segregated areas. But they had to just start basically getting to know one another and realise that the person that lived on the other side of that wall was the same as them. As the programmes changed, and as the situation changed and the environment changed and the political instability and stability changed and weaved its way through the 25 years, it grew and it changed, and the projects changed from being getting to know one another to sharing education together for our young people, development support for our children, because we understand how important it is to support young children who've been through conflict or indeed are living with intergenerational trauma for the future, supporting women, supporting ex-prisoners, supporting victims and survivors. Building capital spaces, the one we're all referring to, Black Mountain Space, was funded through the Peace Programme. The Peace Bridge in Derry was funded there, bringing communities together. Because it's not just about a building, it's about what happens within that building. That has moved on. Now, as I said, we're looking at economic prosperity, and immediately after the Good Friday Agreement, there was quite a push for economic reskilling of people, because they'd suffered through a lot of trauma and a lot of the violence, and they hadn't been given opportunities to skill and to get into employment. So there's quite a focus on that as well. So tangible things. But as we changed and we've moved through now, we're supporting SME, we're supporting reskilling, access. We've realised how important equality of access to services is for people, particularly in the border areas, but also those areas that were most badly affected are still the most economically deprived. Now, 25 years later, that should not be the case. And people there are working really hard, but it's still the case. And unfortunately, in those areas that are most deprived, that's where you see the regression into conflict, and that's where you see the most narrow mindsets. So it's important for us to mention the fact that there were so many champions throughout the years, for 25 years at all levels, supported politically, supported by international partners, yourselves and the EU, and that was really important to have that independent voice, that independent person coming in and saying, no, this is making us listen at times when we needed to. The champions that we had all throughout those years were really important, and people did genuinely take risks for peace. And as Joe met somebody who still is taking a risk for peace now, the loyalist gentleman he mentioned still can't tell where he works, that he's doing cross-community work because it wouldn't go down well in his community. So there are still issues there, but those champions lived on. And what I think was we had a web, we call it the lattice, but it's like a silk web of all of these 20,000 projects, those people who are out there individually making a difference day in, day out. And so for us, it's really important to remember and to share these insights, particularly now with there's so much conflict across the world, to think about what you do before there's a political peace agreement, how you lay the foundations with the people for a political peace agreement. Whenever people think about a political peace agreement now, they think about the hard issues, like the infrastructure, like the rebuilding of roads. Of course, they all have to happen, but a person who's gone through that trauma and the intergenerational trauma that we now see, Joe alluded to the challenges we have still in Northern Ireland, we're seeing the manifestation of intergenerational trauma. Not just people who were there, the people who have been born afterwards in those most deprived areas suffer as well. So for us, it's really important that those people who are looking, all of you who are experts working in these fields, if we can share any insights at any time about what we did, we would be delighted to. Because we want to make you see that it's not just about rebuilding the infrastructure, but the people have to be rebuilt as well.
Thank you, Gina. John, in terms of Waterways Ireland and the work that it does, how do you think Waterways Ireland has contributed over the last 25 years to that kind of process of, because in terms of peace and reconciliation, it's not just a matter for peace and reconciliation within Northern Ireland, it's also that re-establishment of relations, another way of working on what we call a north-south basis between the two jurisdictions, people, communities. How would you see Waterways Ireland's role in that?
I think there are two things. One is around people and one is around the projects that we undertake. But maybe before I go there, I'll just quote some data. So we've just done some quantitative research. And to put it in perspective, there are about 7 million people living in Ireland and Northern Ireland at the moment. We had 3.5 million visitors last year to our waterways. And to dig down a little bit more, about 25% of the 3.5 million are what I would call cross-border visitors. So these are people coming from Ireland into Northern Ireland on the waterways and people coming back from Northern Ireland into Ireland on the waterways. So that's a very significant piece of data, I believe. It's about 800,000 people in the last 12 months. And if you ever go to a boat, and they're predominantly boaters, so they're either on cruise hire or private boaters. Some of them are walking, some of them are cycling on greenways. If you ever go to a boat rally, if you go to the Shannon boat rally, you'll find it's packed with people. There's grandfathers, grandmothers, mums, dads, children, grandchildren. It's a really diverse group of people who have an interest. And I think the contribution to peace, I guess, is people moving around the island of Ireland, engaging with each other, different communities. And I think that's really important. Yeah. If we take that forward in terms of some of the projects that we have different types of projects. So we have projects that are around critical infrastructure. We have projects that are around restoration. So we're restoring the Ulster Canal, which is a cross-border project. There's 15 kilometres of a canal being restored there. It's going to cost over €100 billion. That's been supported by government and the Shared Island Fund. If you go beyond restoration, we have projects that involve regeneration. So go to Tullamore in the Midlands of Ireland, and we have a property there, a couple of acres. We're going to move ourselves out of the couple of acres. We're going to build around the heritage assets, the canal that we have, but we're also going to develop the centre of that town. So that's real regeneration going on the ground. And then we have a very significant, substantive a set of assets in Dublin, the capital city of Ireland, where our waterways have been underinvested in for many years. We have 2 canals that are hundreds of years old, and we have assets in the docklands. And what we're looking to do over time is transformatively develop those assets so that Dublin is a capital that's comparable with other European cities in terms of the waterway features there. So I think a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, it's not just bricks and mortar. It's what the bricks and mortar, the big infrastructure projects that you have. It's much more than bricks and mortar. It's what it sparks off.
We can't do any of our work without collaboration.
Yeah.
So whether that's collaboration with other state agencies, or whether it's collaboration with Fáilte Ireland, or collaboration with local communities. So without the collaboration piece, that's our secret sauce. We can't actually succeed.
Yeah. We've talked about or mentioned an institutional framework and legislation that was put in place in order to establish the implementation bodies. But when we talk about institutional framework, the implementation bodies set up under legislation and the kind of the remits that they have, what does that actually mean in practice? I mean, we've got some insights in terms of that from Gina and SEPB, from John and Waterways Ireland. But in terms of the LOCKSS agency, you've got a very specific kind of remit, and it's kind of almost sounds as if geographically it's Lough Foyle, Collinford, Loch. But what does that actually mean in practice, and the kind of what does it involve in terms of cooperation?
Okay, I'm going to start with actually something that just came into mind by an Irish diplomat who attended one of our conferences in 2019. He actually made the opening address, a gentleman called Tim O'Connor, which I think you're all very familiar with. And he said, there's no better job in the world than getting up in the morning to work in the environment and cross-border cooperation. What a job. And he actually touched a nerve with a lot of our employees that day and gave them a sense of what they were actually doing and trying to achieve. So you had mentioned, Anthony, the framework. Yes, there is. We couldn't do our job without the legislative framework that's in place. And one of that pieces of legislation is, of course, the Implementation Bodies Order, which gives us our remit. And actually, we go back to 1952, where the two governments did put legislation in place called the Foyle Fisheries Act, which allowed us to manage a contested space, transboundary water, called Lough Foyle. And to that day, we still use that piece of legislation, which has been strengthened now by the Implementation Bodies Order. So in 1952, it was about managing Atlantic salmon stocks, which were in abundance. And if anybody knows anything about Atlantic salmon, they are now an endangered species. They are in great decline. The population has decreased by 90% in the last 20 years. So, we have a very unique job to do. And we do that, as John said, like John, we can't do our job without collaboration. We have to work with other agencies on the island of Ireland and in the UK, and actually right across Europe now. We've become, on the international stage, people have realised what we do. We're actually working, leading 3 EU projects now right across Europe. One of them actually is in the Bosporus Straits in Turkey. We're in the Danish Straits. We're working in the Straits of Gibraltar. And that is because of the work we did as a cross-border body and the work we continue to do. And it's about that ecosystems approach. That's how we manage the environment. So an ecosystems approach has to be collaborative if you think about it, a total systems approach, because our systems are interconnected. So what happens in one jurisdiction in regard to the environment and in regard to environment legislation or lack of it affects the neighbours next door, so to speak. So we have this unique law that was enacted in 1952 that allows us to prosecute by domicile. So we can follow, say, for example, pollution or fisheries or environmental offences across the border. So we can follow that trail across the border unhindered, we can do it without any one objecting to it, and then we can prosecute by domicile. So regardless of where the pollution or the fisheries offence is committed, we can prosecute you where you live. So that's a unique set of legislation, and it's over 70 years old now, and it's still very relevant today. It needs updated, we all acknowledge that, but what we have learned is the environment is forever changing, as you all know. Societal changes, technology has changed, so we have to work in collaboration, and that's what we're doing now with Europe. And actually we work quite closely with Tallahassee University in Canada, huge supporters. of what we do, and that's about not just what we do in the freshwater environment within the island of Ireland, but it also is about the ocean economy. So our work is supporting economic development, as we have to have clean water, we have to have good water quality for fish stocks, we have to have that sustains commercial fishing, trade, industry and other associated industries that come with the commercial fishing. And also we promote sustainable marine tourism, which is how humans interact with the environment. So if you're coming to interact in our waterways, we want you to do it in a respectful and considerate manner. So we have an extensive education programme that looks at starting with the very young. And it's also about peace building, but it's also about what a better way to encourage peace building is through the environment. So we have 3,000 children a year through our education programmes, through salmon ambassadors, water warriors, foiling Carlingford ambassadors. Huge programme, and but we can't do any of that without collaboration. It's in our DNA. Yeah. That's what North-South bodies are. Yeah. You know, the ethos of what we do is about collaboration. So everything we do is in collaboration. Should it be government departments, agencies, academia? Yeah. So it's on the ground every day.
It's in part of your DNA. It's part of all of the implementation bodies' DNA. But I think sometimes I'm not saying you, but sometimes it's taken for granted. It's what we do, but sometimes it's not understood by others what that actually involves in terms of doing that work of cooperation. I want to turn to you, Duncan. How important do you think it has been in terms of implementation bodies, their role in terms of, or what they do in terms of cooperating across jurisdictional line, but all sorts of different administrative lines, in terms of communities and the kind of how they live and how they see themselves?
So, Northern Ireland has been, the whole politics of the last 100 years has been dominated by questions of divisions, walls, borders, all sorts of things. So collaboration is actually, it's far more unique than it sounds, actually, this notion that actually, and if I was to say two things. First of all, I really go back to this notion that implementation bodies, it's the wrong word, they're implementation and development bodies. They have learned on our behalf, actually, and part of, I think, a deficit is sitting listening to what they learned, not just what they implemented, and I think that is really important. It's actually really important because we're learning to do what we didn't know how to do. And a lot of that was literally experimentation and people sticking something out and trying something out and being given the room to do so. Because moving from enmity to reconciliation is unbelievably hard practical work and be set back by one small thing. And we've seen it being set back by one small thing. And unless you have the capacity to find resilience and more than resilience, the willingness to take to the next stage, you don't go anywhere. And implementation bodies, and especially some of these cross-border bodies, which had to work across different political imperatives, different legal systems, different expectations of what was being done, have had to develop massively important new ways of working. So if I was to say to you what I think the biggest thing that this collaboration has done is we've learned something which I'm not sure is particularly politically palatable these days, but I am absolutely certain of, which is that taking back control means working in better partnership. And the language of taking back control against partnership, I believe, is catastrophic. I think in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, we have really had to learn over 100 years that antagonism only breeds further antagonism, and that peace-building process is how do you, in the face of all sorts of incentives to be antagonistic, by the way, like people are doing things which actually make you very antagonistic. How do you, in the face of that, bring back control through sustainable relationships? And I think that is, we talk about hard and soft here, and I actually think it's now hard and harder. The hard things, the easy things to do in the sense are to stick the concrete in the ground. That's fine. You can do that. The harder bit is all those uncontrollable bits of human relationship which have to be worked on, and which they're not as easy, and this is not a dig at politicians at all, they're not as easy to stand in front of and get a photo. But they're actually the fundamental stuff that has to be done, because the proof is the stories that Joe was talking about, which are the kids who say, I can now do things I could not do before. That's the story. And parents who say, you know something, I'm stuck. I am so angry about what happened to me, or so bitter about what happened to me, that I can't do this. But I really want my kids to know, because I know how bad that is for me. That's the kind of risks that I think the collaboration actually enables. And people are doing things they didn't do before. They're going across the border because that's okay. They're doing an environmental project because actually we can see a mutual benefit. They're doing a project on whatever it is. And I suppose I'm always like, I just think this is really, really important stuff. This is not add-on stuff. This is the kind of stuff which we urgently need to learn from each other now. Because if we continue to believe we're going to sort these things out simply by hostility, then Ireland's history is that doesn't actually work. Eventually you have to come round to something which looks like, how do you build a collaborative project? And these implementation bodies, underneath that very glib word, is 20,000 projects. Is a vast amount of experience in this now, some of which has been successful, if we're honest about it, some of which didn't go anywhere. But at other points, some of which went to places we didn't actually know it was even possible to go to. Something came out of. So it's that story that I am kind of. It's almost like an imperative we have to get out. I think I'm in academia now. I think it's one of our jobs is to get that story out somewhere, which is there's something lurking under here which is more important than the apparent softness that peace creates, because this is very hard work. And it has been, there's some very good examples in Ireland now.
Ginny, you want to come in?
Yeah, no, it's just to totally agree with Duncan on that. It is really hard work, and we know that this has been a great success. Northern Ireland has been a great success. The peace process has been a great success. But underneath it all, there's a lot of people who feel, aggrieved, who are still suffering from what happened to them. They're survivors of the conflict, but they lost family members, and those attitudes are still there. And, we're talking about trying to change people's minds. And reconciliation is a very difficult thing. I wouldn't claim that we can get reconciliation with our programme, because reconciliation to you is something different for you, and it's completely different, and it's so intangible. And how can you reconcile people that were never reconciled before in the beginning? To me, it's about healing, it's about forgiveness, it's about finding peace. But reconciliation, I think, is a challenging word, and so we try to avoid that a bit. The one thing I would say, and I've mentioned it already, is intergenerational trauma has a massive impact still on people, particularly in the most deprived areas in Northern Ireland and the border counties as well. And what we're seeing, and I really would urge you to look at this, because what we didn't, this is one of the things we didn't do well enough. We didn't recognise, maybe we didn't have the skills 25 years ago to understand, but it wasn't such a big topic, that we should have been looking after people's minds at that stage early, really, really early, because all of those people who were involved went on to have children, and if they had children already, and they couldn't, no fault of their own, they lacked parenting skills because of the trauma that they had experienced. And you'll understand that if you know anything about PTSD. And then those children go on and they become parents, which they are now 25 years later, and they're still struggling with those issues. So we're so privileged to have our programme that actually can go in now and address some of those issues, like the mental health issues, the teaching people parenting skills, because unfortunately a young child, if they're living in that environment, by the age of 3, has already got an idea of who they are and their identity and who is the enemy, and by the age of 6 it's embedded. And the most startling data point for me is the fact that a child who has had 6 adverse life experiences by the age of 6 will likely die 20 years younger than one of their peers. Now that is horrific. And we are so lucky to have our Peace Plus programme that we can go in there now and address those things. But but I wish we'd done it 25 years ago. But that's one of our lessons, and we're taking it forward, and we're very happy, as I said, to, if we can, share any of those insights, good and bad.
I'm going to come back to you on that, and I'm coming to John. We talked here about experimentation, trying things out, and sometimes they don't work, but also the importance of relationships, working together, failing together, and then coming back and picking things up again. But I'm going to ask, and I'll start with you, John, maybe a tougher question. From your experience of a chief executive of an implementation body of Waterways Ireland and the work it does, if there was one lesson that you think, looking back, you would take, because remember, here we're talking about bodies, organisations that have been working continuously for the last 25 years, which sounds a lot, but we're working in a post-conflict context, and 25 years in that context is like it's a couple of seconds. It's recent. We're still working through that. But is there any lessons from Waterways Ireland you think you'd like to share that, this is not necessarily can be replicated 100% anywhere else, but things that you, from your experience, a lesson that you might want to share?
I think there are two important words that we haven't really spent time talking about. One of them is resilience. So you have to be resilient if you're a North-South implementation body. That's part of the bread and butter stuff. And I think the second one is you have to be adaptable. If I look at where we are presently, I think the big question for our North-South implementation bodies is whether it's about incremental growth or whether it's about transformation. And I think all of the North-South bodies feel that there's an opportunity for transformative growth. There is a big opportunity there, there's no doubt about that. But the other side of this is there are more things happening in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So, for example, there's more investment now in the North, for example, in education, research, health. There will be other bodies to come behind us. And I think the big thing for me is the lesson is don't reinvent the wheel. You've got a group of people and you've got a group of bodies who've been in place 25 years, operating under a legislative framework. But the key really for implementation bodies is you're there to do something. You're there to get an effective result. And if you're there to get an effective result, the things that are important are your strategic and operational framework, how you function, how you operate, the parameters that you work within, the delegated authorities, all the practical things that you have to have available to you to enable you to do the job that you have to do. So the other point I would make, I think Duncan touched on it, we've gone past just pure implementation. There is an enormous amount of development going on. So some of the projects I quoted are beyond operational. They're in the development space now. And I think that's probably the same across all the bodies. So for me, it's transformative growth for the bodies that are there. And for new bodies that come along, don't try and reinvent the wheel. There's already something in place.
Sharon, from your perspective?
Well, I suppose lessons learned. I've worked in two of the implementation bodies. I've been working for 23 years almost in implementation bodies. I worked previously for Waterways Ireland and then moved to Locks Agency. So the one thing that I have found, and John is absolutely right, what we have works. There has been many challenges, but what I would say is always see that challenge as an opportunity. It's not rocket science, and that's what we've done in North-South bodies, and particularly in Locks Agency. We have a very limited amount of resource to spend on what we do, but we practice adaptive management approaches to everything we do. That's what we do. That's how we work. So we have to be flexible. We have to be agile. Governments change, government administrations change, government policy changes. We actually can influence government policy, and that's one of the lessons I have learned, and I think is something we should all take cognizance of. We have the ability to influence government policy at an early stage, given our competency in North-South cooperation, our competency within our areas of expertise. And for us, it's about that scientific research and development piece we do in fisheries management. It's about environmental management. So, it's it's about being able to pivot quite quickly when government policy does change and societal change, and we've seen that recently with climate adaptation being to the forefront of everything that we do now, and we've practiced that actually for decades. And we've always looked at nature-based solutions within the environment, about that total ecosystems approach to what we do. But the other thing I would say is educate, 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 and that's what we do within the LOCKSS Agency, because that brings such good reconciliation, actually, and collaboration, on the ground from the young, and we see that day in and day out. And actually, the other piece we do quite a bit about, when I haven't mentioned, is working with community groups. Even with your local angling clubs. They go out and they help us with habitat restoration works, protecting biodiversity. We did 43 projects last year, and the majority of them were with the local communities, because if you embed that in local communities, that sense of pride in their rivers and their lakes and their environment, and it brings, again, nobody looks at what religion you are, where you're from, when they're working in the environment, because they have a shared objective. So lessons learned, are to me is educate, be agile, be flexible, and be open to change, because change is constant.
Absolutely. Gina, would there anything you'd want to pick out in terms of?
No, I mean, just from the programme point of view, from the peace building side, I think it's just really important that we pay attention to the people, and we look after the most vulnerable in all the societies, and that's what the programmes have done. But the collaboration piece between the administrations, all of those involved in the Good Friday Agreement, has been instrumental in helping in situations such as COVID and indeed Brexit, keeping those relationships there, and that is key. And as I said, we are adamant that all people think about intergenerational trauma. We've got a programme that we can do something about it now to try to stop it being multi-generational trauma. And that's our big lesson from our programmes.
Duncan.
I think the implementing bodies were given a task. They had to implement certain things. Easy to say, hard to do, and the translation of that into practice was, as I say, the real task of these bodies. But I think, if I'm looking back 25 years, they've fostered certain things that would not necessarily have been fostered if we hadn't had bodies dedicated to doing it. And for me, those include participation. These bodies have actually enabled participation in the peace process. The peace process can be talked about at this level, but actually it's a tangible change in people's lives. It's measured by something much... Peace doesn't exist except in the relationships people have. That's where it exists. And it is... So you have to make it participative. You can't, diplomats and politicians, and we here in these rooms and academics can talk about this forever. Unless it means something for people, it's hot air. So this is very important. Participation. Second thing, co-creation. It enabled people. This language of co-creation is all very well as well, but actually what it means is, how can I get my hands on this and do something about it? At some level or other, I think these vast projects have actually created a sense of ownership in the peace process, which is quite deep. And part of that is the implementation bodies and the way they've worked. They've given people... And then the third one is problem solving. Not all problems can be solved by politicians. Politicians need answers which are being developed for them. Also, it's a two-way street. They can make things possible, but on the other side, they need examples coming up. And actually, I think... as I say, trying to do what you don't know how to do is all problem solving. And how do you create it's figure it out. How do we figure it out? How do we get the space where we're allowed to figure it out and do what that has to happen around something as difficult and as high risk as getting away from violence and trying to create an alternative to that. So I think the implementation bodies within them have a story of, as I say, participation, co-creativity, and actually problem solving, which is probably, how do you have an element of that in your peace process? If I was to say, what are we going to sell across the world, I would say, get something which is participative, get something which is co-creative, and get something which is problem solving, because it's not going to be done in a treaty done one day 25 years ago. It's going to have an underpinning which takes you into all that kind of weeds, and I think that is something where there is something quite important in all of these bodies.
Thank you so much, Duncan. I'm actually going to abuse my position as moderator because we have another chief executive here in the audience, and I'd actually like to pose a question to him. So it's Sharon, who's right here in the front row. Right here in the front row is the chief executive for us, Nagelga. So the language body is split up into two organisations, two agencies, for us, Nagelga, promotion of the Irish language, and the Ulster Scots Agency, promotion of Ulster Scots language and culture. But we're talking here about big challenges and new thinking, and we've touched upon it because the implementation bodies work on the island of Ireland, but their work actually, and it's all about collaboration, absolutely about collaboration, but it touches much further than the island of Ireland. And I just want to ask you, Sharon, in terms of your experience of Chief Executive of Forest Nagelga, in terms of the promotion and development of the Irish language, what connections have you made in terms of beyond the island of Ireland, and not just connections kind of geographically beyond it? We're talking about a new world as well, new technologies, AI, all sorts of things. How have you dealt with this kind of changing world and that kind of global outreach?
Thank you, Anthony, and not easily, I would say. Our role is to normalise the use of the Irish language on the island of Ireland. That's primarily what we're doing, and we're doing that very well across the community within the north of Ireland and north and south as well. But increasingly we are becoming aware of the international dimension. One of the ways that we sort of can gauge that is we have an online dictionary. In 2003 we had 4.2 users, people who accessed the dictionary online. 20% of those users were over here in the United States. So that gives you some sense. One of the other things that we've been doing recently is high-level awareness campaigns. So we did one recently in April and May of this year in partnership with the national broadcaster in the South, RTE. Over 137 countries contacted us in various ways with an interest in the Irish language and in what we were doing and looking for more information. And we were also very aware of the fact that over here in the States, in a household survey carried out in 2013, there are 20,000 families for whom the Irish language is the language of their family here in the US. In context of the US, those numbers are probably quite small, but when you consider that the population, the Irish language daily using population in our Gaeltacht areas, which are the Irish-speaking areas along the western seaboard, there are only 20,000 speakers left in those Gaeltacht areas. So that gives you a sense of the international dimension of the Irish language. We're having to move with the times, yeah, and we started to do that in 2003. Part of the legislative framework that set Forest na Gaeilge up gave us responsibility for lexicography, for developing dictionaries and for terminology. Major world languages don't need that type of support. Spanish, English, that's all done commercially. You can't do that with a minoritized language. So for the Irish language, we do that. One of the first things we did in 2003 was our chief terminologist developed a partnership with Microsoft, and I don't know if anybody here remembers Windows XP, but that was the first time that we had an Irish language interface for our computers. So when you looked at your computer, everything was in Irish rather than in English, and we've been able to keep that going right up until the present day. So now the Microsoft Office 365 suite, all of the programs are there available for Irish speakers to have as their interface, and to the extent that Copilot, the AI assistant in Office, is now an Irish speaker. One of our latest people to be able to speak Irish, we can converse entirely with Copilot through Irish and get your responses through Irish, and that's important. Not so much for my generation, I still struggle with it, but I have two grandchildren who are the grandchildren of the peace process. They are being raised entirely through Irish. They're attending Irish medium schools. They live most of their days through Irish speaking. Both their parents are Irish speaking, and for them to be able to interact with the technology on their mobile phones and on their computers. That's so important. So I just want to thank the people here in the room who are the representatives, I suppose, of the investment and the interest that the US has taken in our peace process. They are just some of the very tangible outworkings of what we've been able to achieve. So I just want to thank people for that as well.
Thank you, Sean. And you're absolutely right. It's looking at the concrete outcomes. What's happening on the ground that the implementation bodies that have been responsible for helped to bring about. I'm not sure if there's any burning. I have to take my glasses off here. Has anybody got a burning question? Because we might have space for one question from the audience. If no. We're okay. Oh.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to the first panel as well. My question is about, the work that you've described as really remarkable, and the everyday people who make this possible and who are doing this work day in and day out. Do they know how remarkable this is? You've told your stories to us so powerfully. Do they know how remarkable this is? And does that have an impact on sustaining their efforts to continue participating?
Well, that's...
I'll go first. Maybe.
We have 3 minutes, so...
I'll go first. So the people in Waterways Ireland are really passionate about their product, if you want to call it the product. They're very proud of their product. And I think that they understand their place, which is really, we're custodians. What we're doing is we're handing things down for the future. We're preserving, we're maintaining, we're investing in the future. So they see themselves as custodians. They're very proud of that piece. They're very passionate about what they do, and it's one of our core values. So I think in our case, yes.
Yeah, I would agree. People in the Special Programmes body also really value the work, and the people that we fund understand the importance of what they're doing. And the people that we go to meet see the importance of this investment in peace building and what it means to their daily lives. You meet a child, a young person who maybe at 19 had been a drug addict, in prison, suicide in hospital, and he's come on one of these programmes and his life has turned around. And that, I don't think there's any better job than that of a cross-border body, that you get to see the impact that this work has on people's lives. And they do know, and all the people that do the projects know how important that work is. So, yeah.
And yes, the people in Locke's agency, they're scientists, they're environmental scientists, they're environmentally minded, so they are the most passionate people I've ever worked with in my life, I have to say. The work they do goes unseen, it's 24/7, they're on call all the time. They work across the border day to day, and as we talked about last night within Locke's agency, if you come to visit us, we have huge maps. Everybody loves maps of our jurisdiction, our area, and we actually couldn't tell you where the border is between Northern Ireland and Ireland because we work within our catchments. We look at the river catchments, and yes, totally passionate. And as I said, we did have a conference in 2019. It was actually the launch of one of the SEUPB programmes we had, Sea Monitor, and we asked Tim O'Connor to come and talk to us. And Tim brought original documents from the Good Friday Agreement, and he's did the same for some of the other organisations. But he actually got through to them, and they began to realise, wow, we do an important job, and they did it through Brexit. And as I said, Locke's agency was there before. The implementation body order came into effect. So they did it through the Troubles as well. They traversed the border seamlessly. They work with the Garda, they work with the PSNI, and they are the most passionate people on the planet, I have to say.
I'm going to leave you with a question mark on that one. I think the people who work on these projects are incredibly committed to what they do and have taken often massive risks. Like the word risk doesn't really apply. They've gone to the place that they least wanted to go to in order to get over things and have done some really remarkable things. So that's one. Number two, I think it is, the funny thing is, if you're working in funding bodies, one of the problems is what are we actually asking people to be responsible for? And I think that a lot of these projects is actually just do your project well and do that well. And sometimes you overload them with saying, you know, you've got to create peace. Peace is not going to be created by just one project, and it's not fair to ask that, but it is important that it's amalgamated up into a story, this kind of outcomes-based accountability that they talk about. It's great, but it's the task of the implementation bodies to join up what is happening here with the bigger picture. And I think that's something we have to become better at one level. And then the third part for me is this. I think there is a risk that what the implementation bodies have done is not joined up with learning to change policy enough yet. That vast amounts of, I could take you to Northern Ireland and bring you to 500 innovation projects, say for example in education or in cross-border working. There's millions of them, and they're really fantastic. They really are. You can go, really inspiration. And I don't know why it doesn't move into policy quicker. And part of it is, if I'm honest, because I think the money doesn't come from the government. In other words, it comes from an outside agency and you can treat it as external. And I want that joining up better. I feel as if we've had more pilots than United Airlines. You know, that I want to see how a pilot translates into a policy and that's into a culture change. And that's just my hesitation here. There's something really importantly has happened here that's really important to capture, but how we join it up into making sure that it doesn't slip back and just is a policy, a project that ends after the funding ends, but turns into a culture change. I think that's a really, if I was to say the next 25 years, that'll be the test. Did it change the culture? Did it tip the whole culture? And how did we make that happen? And I think that's a useful challenge for all of us.
Thank you, Duncan, for finishing by challenging everybody in the room. Thank you so much. And look, I'd just like to thank the panel and to thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over now to our host for the closing remarks. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and to this fabulous panel. It was truly inspiring. I really learned a lot. Appreciate that. I have been given the great honor of saying a few closing remarks for our afternoon before we all go out and to the reception. And so I would like to first extend my heartfelt thanks to all of our panelists today and to the United States Institute of Peace for hosting this great afternoon. Thank you to the core of this program, which really are our partners at the Strand 2 institutions. We really appreciate you making the journey over here and talking about your passion and your work. Also, thanks to the teams at the State Department, the Irish Embassy, the British Embassy, and the Northern Ireland Bureau for your efforts to be here today and for everything to bring this event to life. Today offers us an opportunity to reflect and to learn, and also a chance to envision our next steps forward as we mark 25 years of powerful cross-border cooperation, and we honor all of those who have worked to build and sustain that. As we look back on last year's celebration of 25 years of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, it really is essential to recognize the profound transformation it has fostered in Northern Ireland. This landmark agreement laid out new possibilities for a new generation, one that could know peace as a norm rather than the divisions of the past. It established a stronger shared foundation that could help communities flourish and allow families and neighborhoods to shape a future rooted in cooperation and in hope. Of course, none of this progress could have been done or possible without the vision and the dedication of those who brought the Belfast Good Friday Agreement to life. As President Biden remarked in Belfast last year, peace in Northern Ireland was never guaranteed. It required tenacity, vision, and the courage to believe in a shared, better future. Senator Mitchell's leadership exemplified this spirit. describing the negotiations as 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. His work, along with the commitment of leaders across Ireland and Northern Ireland, gave life to the peace and progress that we are celebrating here today, reminding us of the transformative power of dialogue and determination. In celebrating 25 years of Strand 2 implementation bodies, we are reminded that Northern Ireland's progress is closely linked to the establishment of the North-South institutions, the North-South Ministerial Council, and the implementation bodies. That their support for cooperation between Northern Ireland and Ireland was absolutely essential. These bodies foster collaboration on economic development, public health, and environmental sustainability, strengthening prosperity across the entire island. By facilitating cross-border trade, managing shared resources, and building partnerships, these institutions have created a foundation for mutual growth, and they have proved that cooperation and shared goals are essential to an all-island prosperity. Today, Belfast has become a hub of economic opportunity and creativity, with Northern Ireland as a whole positioned for significant growth and investment. In the 26 years since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, Northern Ireland has seen a remarkable economic transformation, with its GDP doubling and industries expanding. Major American companies have established a strong presence, employing over 30,000 people, and American investment in the region has reached nearly $2 billion in the past decade alone. This progress highlights the powerful link between peace and prosperity, with young people in Northern Ireland seizing new opportunities in fields like technology, energy, and life sciences, choosing to build their futures at home in an increasingly thriving economy. I would be greatly remiss if I didn't mention that one of the main drivers, or the main driver, for the U.S. government's effort behind all of this is our Special Envoy, Joe Kennedy, who worked tirelessly to attract more investment and help unlock the region's full economic potential. So tirelessly, in fact, as he mentioned, that he's just returned from his 10th official trip to Belfast and immediately got on a flight to come here and join us. So thank you. Joe, let me join the chorus of your supporters in saying what a tremendous job you have done in this role. Thank you for everything you've done for the United States and Northern Ireland. As Northern Ireland advances along this path of peace and growth, the world is watching with admiration and optimism. The achievements here are a testament to the resilience of its people and their commitments to take advantage of the opportunities of the Good Friday Accords. As we heard today, they are also a model for regions facing their own challenges. Each new venture, every cross-border partnership, and all opportunities young people now pursue signal the transformative power of collaboration and unity. Northern Ireland's journey serves as a beacon of hope for communities everywhere, striving towards reconciliation and economic renewal, reminding us all that lasting peace is built by the choices we make together each day. The gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and preserving the prosperity it has created remain priorities not only for our leaders in Washington, but for countless Americans who hold Northern Ireland close in their hearts. Across the U.S., support for Northern Ireland's peace and progress is a unifying force. It crosses political divides and resonates deeply within American communities. The United States' commitment to Northern Ireland is one of enduring partnership and shared hope. Your success is our success. Together, we will continue to build on this legacy of peace for generations to come. And so thank you all for being here today.